back to BlockTV. It's time now for HODL with HEDL, a chance to zoom out for a moment and take a wider perspective on some of the heady issues that dominate the crypto markets as a whole. To guide us on this journey of discovery, we're joined by early Bitcoiner and thought leader Dan Held, co-founder of asset management firm Interchange. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
All right, so Dan, we're today hopping in the Wayback Machine, taking a look at the good old days, way back in about 2013, to look at the OG Bitcoiners, those guys who were really in it back at the beginning before there was that huge money to be made. Tell us, just start off, I just want to know, what was the feel like back then, back in the early days when you got involved? And in fact, maybe even better place to start. Dan, tell us about how you first got into Bitcoin.
I first got into Bitcoin when a friend of mine gave me a Cassatius coin. Those are the little round coins that you see in all the news articles that are shiny and super bright. And he paid me back for a beer when I was back in Texas. He paid me back for a beer with one of those. And it was a very kind of important tool, I think, at that time. You know, this was back in 2012. It was a very important tool to bridge the gap between the physical and digital world. Not many people had really been introduced to digital money, and it didn't really make a ton of sense at the time. So having this physical item was really nice to help if someone who wasn't very familiar with how this technology worked, to bridge that gap. Later down the road, I would dive in a little bit further around what Bitcoin enabled, which was around Silk Road. So I think a lot of people in 2012, 2011, 2013 saw the power of Bitcoin through Silk Road. I'm not saying that I used it, I'm saying that I saw the power of what it could do. Silk Road was a testament to its resiliency or its censorship resistance. And I think, for me, dealing with how complex Bitcoin was in 2012, I didn't immediately go out and dump my entire life savings into it. A lot of people think that the OGs all did that, and almost none of them did that. It was still very risky. It was very hard to buy Bitcoin. You used to have to wire your money to Mt. Gox, which was in Japan, which would take 3 days to 7 days. And you used to have to do it through a service called Walla or BitInstant, which BitInstant was pretty scary because you'd have to hand off your cash to this weird process of, I don't normally send cash across borders. And so that was super funky back then. So I would say, to summarize the experience in 2013 or 2012, 2013, when I got into it, was awkward. Everything was awkward about it, from private key management to the software that I used, which was the Bitcoin QT client, to Mt. Gox, the trading infrastructure. It was all very immature and very awkward.
May I ask as well, Dan, if you don't mind telling us, what was the price of Bitcoin when you bought your first ever?
I didn't buy a lot at this price, but
no.
$10. $10.
$10. Wow, that's something that a lot of people would sure be kicking themselves not to have gotten in at that particular price point. But tell us now then about that feel. Back when it's worth $10 a coin. Some of the even earlier adopters surely have made a little money, but there's still certainly not that big scale interest. Tell us a little bit about who was there. Some of the big names now that back then were just small fish. Trying to find their way in this pond. Give us a bit of a feel for what it was like in those early meetups and early sort of community engagement with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, back then I didn't really understand kind of the enormity of who I'd be working with or who I'd be kind of interacting with on a physical level in San Francisco, and just some of the characters in the space that were building different products and services. I think back then some bigger names were, of course, like Roger Ver, Charlie Shrem. The Winklevi twins were super popular. They were the openers at the Bitcoin 2013 conference. It was kind of cool. I think the Winklevi were the first celebrities, or the first publicly known people to actually come and endorse Bitcoin. So they were actually really positive influence in 2013. And I don't think a lot of people remember how positive that was. We were like, look, look at these two. They're willing to attach their reputation to Bitcoin, which at that time in 2013, Bitcoin wasn't really considered a very positive thing. Even in the San Francisco Bay Area, if you went to a dinner party or on a date and you talked about Bitcoin in 2013, it was not cool. It was considered very unethical or unsavory. people felt like you were building software for money launderers or drug dealers.
Yeah, certainly, that was for so long the sort of characterization there. And I want to talk a little bit about that notion, because it's often said that Bitcoin has been, so far, cryptos as a whole now have been adopted in waves. You started with the cypherpunks, and then the anarcho-capitalists, and then perhaps you had some of the more unsavory characters come in and use it for their own nefarious purposes. Then speculators come in, and now certainly we seem to be on the cusp of large-scale mainstream adoption. Did you feel those waves sort of come and ebb and flow into the market, and how that sort of changed the face of the community? Or did you always feel like there was a core community that you were a part of?
In 2013, we thought we were going to take over the world. It took a little longer than we expected. I was also much younger at that time, so I learned that these things take a long time to build out. I think the ethos has definitely changed a little bit. Where, in 2015, 2016, digital ledger technology, DLT, or blockchain tech, that's when that term became popular. And then that's kind of carried that term all the way from then till now, which constitutes a majority of people who don't really even understand why Bitcoin's important or how blockchains even work. Blockchains are really terrible ledgers. You can't just sprinkle some blockchain dust on something and make it, phenomenal. And so I think the early ethos, the early cohort of believers were very much cypherpunk libertarian types. So these are types that either own guns or actually bought things on Silk Road or had built peer-to-peer file sharing software before that. It was very much kind of a ragtag group of revolutionaries. And as it progressed in time, we definitely saw more and more people hop in, not just based on belief, but that they saw a new burgeoning industry where they could either in a scammy way take advantage of that burgeoning industry, or in an ethical way just attach their kind of life work by building and building products in the space. And yeah, some of these photos are super crazy to look back on. This was the first Bitcoin conference I went to, the San Jose Bitcoin conference, and as you see with the Coinbase, I remember the Coinbase desk here, and it was Brian and Fred who personally managed the booth, and they had printed out that Coinbase branded piece of paper there, and they didn't even have, I think, a full banner sign behind them. I think they went kind of like really scrappy startup style and had just printed that out. And pretty wild to see it come from. And this was the first conference where I shilled my own product. It's called Zero Block, which was like the Blockfolio equivalent in terms of popularity and functionality. I hard shilled my product person to person at that conference. So that was kind of the first real kind of awakening where I felt that's kind of the spirit of the community. And it was super, super fun.
Yeah, certainly a different time though, as well, as we saw in that photo there. Coinbase and Brian Armstrong at the time giving away 0.01 Bitcoin for registering your email. Today worth about $100 US. Not a bad price to pay to just sign up an email, maybe a little out of the price range now. So clearly different times. And I guess I want to talk about sort of egos and personalities within that frame. I mean, the fact that people were thrown from relative obscurity into the limelight. Perhaps, as you say, it wasn't as instant and overnight as perhaps you might have thought in those days. But certainly in the years since, Brian Armstrong, let's talk about as a case point, sort of really growing into his own and certainly becoming a big name. But of course, as well, you've noted to us in the past that you were key in the redesign around 2014, I believe, of Bitcoin.com, now owned by Roger Ver, and the sort of splitting of ideas and personalities that came from that. At the beginning, It was just Bitcoin. Now we've got so many forks, branches, different ideas, whether we talk about Bitcoin itself, whether we talk about altcoins. How did you feel that fracturing take place in real time?
Yeah, I mean, the fracturing was sad in a way, right? We were kind of this united community back in 2013, 2014. Most people just believed in Bitcoin back then. There's even a tweet by Brian Armstrong where he says, I don't see any other cryptocurrency being worth our time. Bitcoin is basically all we should look at, which you can find. It's pretty interesting to see his thoughts back in, I think that was 2014 or 2015. And so most people have been aligned around Bitcoin. And, I think the scaling debate definitely kind of fractured the community. The Bitcoin Cash and the Bitcoin SV side definitely, I think, grossly misunderstood what Bitcoin was meant for. And it's represented that most people didn't agree with them either because their communities are much, much smaller. But, that was a pretty brutal struggle to kind of pit brother against brother, sister against sister in this battle for the mind share of Bitcoin. And then as well, in 2015, the bottom, the despair of the Bitcoin bear market, these companies were looking to do anything to survive. And so this is where they started to add other crypto assets. This is where they would do DLT or consulting projects around blockchain or pay lip service to that idea because it would make them money, which is totally fine. It's what businesses should do. But, it definitely is kind of sad to see everyone kind of fracture off and join their own ranks. I mean, Bitcoin's community is still the largest one. Bitcoin is still by far the largest cryptocurrency in terms of market cap, on-chain volume, trading volume, and connectivity and trading pairs. So Bitcoin is still that dominant currency. It'd be nice to see people come back to kind of go back to the basics. In San Francisco, I often find that almost everyone here who says they like Ethereum, they've never even read the Bitcoin white paper. So they've never even started with the basics. They just kind of jumped ahead and go, hey, I like code, so Ethereum must be cool. And, I ask these people, I go, well, what's the monetary policy of Ethereum? And no one knows. No one in San Francisco, when you ask them what the monetary policy of Ethereum is, maybe not no one, 99% don't know. And that clearly indicates that we've totally missed on the educational process of what we're building here. It's called cryptocurrency for a reason. This isn't called, this isn't called software platforms. These have native built-in currencies, and those need monetary policies. And that's the whole point as to why Satoshi planted the seed of Bitcoin in the financial crisis. This wasn't just some generic technology he came up with to be used for anything. Blockchain tech was purposely built to build Bitcoin.
So then I guess we lead and segue nicely into the situation that we find ourselves in today and sort of looking at the market as it stands now. These days, if we're talking about waves of interest, we're on the cusp of that large-scale institutional investment. Some would argue that we're already underway in that. The most recent big market move, of course, being that Bakkt launching their test set for their futures trading that they plan to launch this quarter, and that directly aimed at large-scale institutional investment. Where do you see the market today in terms of, I guess, in regards to that early vision? Do you think that it's coming true? Or as you say, in regards to education, do you think the market's totally sort of gone off the rails and missed the boat from what that early vision was?
Well, the fact that institutions are buying Bitcoin first and that Bitcoin is the one that many, many are talking about as the true innovation here, that's exciting. It feels like we are going back to the basics. We are going, okay, why was Bitcoin created? And you're starting to see the narrative that Bitcoin is becoming the risk-off trade or the safe haven asset. We're starting to see companies like Invesco say that. We're starting to see really, really big names. We're starting to see Barclays say that. Barclays published a research report which compared Bitcoin to gold. And so as we see that, we're seeing that they're starting to grasp the fundamental nature of why Bitcoin was created. And I think with the new macro backdrop of kind of social unrest in the world, and with just yesterday on Bloomberg, they talked about how the Democrats and the Republicans came together on a budget proposal to increase the debt ceiling to where the U.S. will be incurring $1 trillion deficits, budget deficits annually. So I think constantly we're being reminded as to why Bitcoin is being built. And institutions, I think, have bought in on the Gold 2.0 narrative. It's simple, it's understandable, and it's exactly why Bitcoin is built.
Certainly, it does seem like things are heading on the right track for the cryptosphere as a whole. So much happening, so much excitement and buzz in all forms of media, representation, regulation. And we'll have to see where the future holds. And Dan, I hope that in another 5 years we can come and have an update on this conversation and see where it is then. But in lieu of that, we'll look forward to speaking to you next week, Dan, to discuss more about the wider macro issues in and around the crypto sphere and facing Bitcoin. Dan Held, thanks so much for joining us. Let's see you next week, and stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.